The millionaire was not approached by anyone until the housekeeper's 7-year-old son offered him a cookie. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from. The June morning in New York City arrived with a biting chill that made pedestrians quicken their pace along the bustling avenues of the financial district. On the top floor of the Vance Tower, an imposing glass and steel structure that rose like a spear against the grey sky of the Big Apple, Alexander Vance stood motionless in front of the panoramic window of his office. His brown eyes, framed by wrinkles that revealed decades of worries and tough decisions, observed the human anthill below with the same analytical coldness with which he examined financial reports. At 58 years old, Alexander had transformed a small brokerage inherited from his father into one of the largest financial conglomerates in the country. Vance Holdings controlled everything from investment banks to retail chains, and its annual revenue surpassed the GDP of some U.S. states. But success had come at a price. The man who once dreamed of building bridges between people now lived, isolated in his glass tower, surrounded by subordinates who feared him more than they respected him. "Mr. Vance," the hesitant voice of his secretary Sarah echoed through the intercom. Even after 15 years of working for him, she still felt a knot in her stomach whenever she had to interrupt him. "The audit reports have arrived. Leave them on the desk," Alexander replied without turning, his deep voice carrying that tone of authority that made even seasoned executives choose their words carefully. "And cancel my lunch with the folks from the Federal Reserve. I'm not in the mood for political theater today." Sarah swallowed hard. "Sir, that's the third lunch you've cancelled this week. The president of the Fed is displeased." "Let him be." Alexander finally stepped away from the window, revealing a tall, elegant man, dressed in an impeccable Italian suit that cost more than the annual salary of most Americans. His graying hair was perfectly styled, and his broad shoulders still maintained the upright posture that intimidated adversaries in boardrooms. "If he wants my attention, let him present serious proposals, not elevator chit-chat." Alexander's office was a perfect reflection of his personality, functional, imposing, and coldly beautiful. The walls were lined with genuine mahogany, adorned with modern artworks worth fortunes. A 19th-century mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, always organized with military precision. Only 3 photographs broke the austerity of the space. One from the company's founding day, another from his graduation at Harvard, and a third that he kept face down, a family photo that no one dared to ask about. "There's one more thing, sir," Sarah continued, consulting her electronic agenda. "The cleaning company sent a new employee for the night shift. The documents are here for your approval." Alexander frowned. Operational details rarely reached him. But since the recent corporate security incidents, when a competitor attempted to plant spies among the outsourced staff, he had demanded personal approval for any new employee who would have access to the premises after hours. "Name?" he asked, extending his hand to receive the folder. "Lisa Johnson. She came from rural Pennsylvania." Impeccable references, according to the company. Alexander quickly reviewed the documents. The photo showed a woman in her mid-30s with determined eyes and a subtle smile. On the form, she had marked single mother as her marital status and listed experience in hospital and commercial cleaning. Something in those eyes intrigued him for a moment, a combination of vulnerability and strength that he rarely saw in the corporate world. "Approve," he said, returning the folder. "But keep the security protocol reinforced." "And Sarah?" She paused at the door. "No exceptions to the rules. If there are any irregularities, immediate termination." "Yes, sir." When he was alone again, Alexander returned to the window. Below, the city buzzed with the chaotic energy that only New York City possessed. Millions of people running after their dreams, most destined for failure. He wondered how many of them looked at his building and saw it as a symbol of success, unaware that the man at the top felt more like a prisoner than a king. The phone rang, interrupting his melancholic thoughts. The display showed an international number he recognized immediately: Marcus Steinberg, a German investor who had been showing suspicious interest in acquiring a stake in Vance Holdings. "Alexander, my dear friend." Marcus's voice sounded artificial even through the international line. "I hope you're well. I called to see if you've reconsidered our proposal." "There's nothing to reconsider, Marcus," Alexander replied tersely. "My company is not for sale." "Ah, but the market is unpredictable, isn't it? Especially when certain information starts to circulate. I've heard that some investors are questioning your stability. They say you've been quite isolated, very emotionally unstable." Alexander felt his blood run cold. "What information?" "Nothing confirmed, of course," Marcus laughed, but the sound had no humor. "Just rumors. You know how this business is. People love gossip. But imagine if the press started speculating about your mental health. The effect on the stocks would be devastating. Are you threatening me, Marcus?" "On the contrary, I'm offering a solution. Accept our offer, and these rumors simply disappear, decline and whelm. I can't guarantee that others won't start asking uncomfortable questions." Alexander hung up without responding. He had known Marcus for years. The German was notorious for his dirty tactics and the pleasure he took in destroying Brazilian family businesses. But this time he had chosen the wrong target. Alexander hadn't come this far to be intimidated by European opportunists. He headed to the private bar in his office and poured himself a generous glass of 25-year-old bourbon. The amber liquid burned his throat, but it couldn't warm the cold he felt inside. Marcus was right about one thing. He was isolated. He sometimes spent entire days speaking only with subordinates and business partners. When was the last time he had a genuine conversation with someone? The sound of footsteps in the outer corridor interrupted his thoughts. Sarah had left hours ago, and the building should be practically empty. It was probably the cleaning crew starting the night shift, including the new cleaning staff member, Lisa Johnson. Alexander returned to his desk and dove into the audit reports, determined to find any loophole that his enemies could exploit. But even while focused on the numbers, a part of his mind kept thinking about the new cleaning employee. There was something in her eyes that intrigued him, a determination he recognized, perhaps because he once possessed it himself. Outside, the New York night spread over the city like a black cloak dotted with the lights of millions of windows. In one of them, on the top floor of the tallest tower, a powerful man worked alone, unaware that his life was about to be transformed by someone he considered invisible. The real story was just beginning. Lisa Johnson pushed the cleaning cart down the marble corridor of the 35th floor, her footsteps echoing softly in the silence that dominated the building after hours. It was her first week at Vance Holdings, and she was still impressed by the opulence of the place, from the imported crystal chandeliers to the artworks that cost more than a house in rural Pennsylvania, from where she had left 3 months ago in search of a better life for her son. "Mom, can I explore a little?" Gabriel, her 7-year-old son, appeared behind a granite column, his brown eyes shining with curiosity. The boy was a perfect mix of childlike energy and precocious maturity, a result of having grown up helping his mother through all of life's difficulties. "You can, sweetheart, but be quiet and don't touch anything," Lisa whispered, nervously checking the empty corridors. "And if you hear someone coming, run to the break room, okay?" Gabriel nodded eagerly and disappeared toward the reception area, fascinated by the tropical fish swimming in a gigantic aquarium. Lisa sighed, feeling the familiar weight of guilt in her chest. She knew she was breaking rules by bringing her son to work, but she had no choice. The neighbor who usually watched him at night had traveled, and a babysitter cost more than half her salary. "It's just for a few days," she murmured to herself, as she always did when guilt tightened its grip. "Things will get better soon." She began cleaning the desks in the administrative area, her movements efficient and careful. She had learned over the years that a job well done opened doors, even if slowly. Each surface she polished, each glass she left crystal clear, was a small investment in her future. A future where she could give Gabriel everything he deserved. 3 floors above, Alexander remained in his office, surrounded by documents and financial reports. The threats from Marcus Steinberg still echoed in his mind, mixed with concerns about the upcoming market movements. The silence of the empty building sometimes bothered him. Other times, it was his only refuge from the constant chaos of decisions and responsibilities. Then he heard something unusual, a child's giggle coming from the floor below. Alexander frowned, lowering his reading glasses. Children in the building after hours were strictly prohibited, a safety rule he had, implemented years ago after an incident involving an employee who had brought relatives to see the office and ended up facilitating a theft of confidential information. He saved the document he was working on and headed to the private elevator. He descended silently to the 35th floor, following the sound of tiny footsteps echoing through the corridors. What he found left him momentarily confused. A boy with brown hair and bright eyes stood in front of a painting by Tarsila do Amaral that decorated the reception area, his head tilted in a look of pure concentration. He wore simple but clean clothes, a slightly faded New York Yankees t-shirt and sneakers that had seen better days. His small hands were clasped behind his back, as if he were a respectful visitor in a museum. "What's this story?" Gabriel murmured to himself, studying the abstract shapes of the painting. "It looks like there are a lot of sad people in here." Alexander approached silently, intrigued by the child's insightful observation. The painting indeed conveyed a melancholy that many adults failed to grasp. "It's Workers by Tarsila do Amaral," Alexander said, causing Gabriel to jump in surprise and turn quickly. The boy's eyes widened at the sight of the tall, elegant man before him. He didn't need to be very smart to realize he was in the presence of someone important. Everything about Alexander, from his impeccable suit to his imposing posture, screamed authority. "I'm sorry, sir," Gabriel stammered, taking a step back. "I didn't touch anything, I swear. My mom said not to touch anything." The pure fear on the child's face touched something in Alexander that he thought had died years ago. "Calm down," he said gently, crouching down to be at eye level with the boy. "You're not in trouble. I'm just curious. What are you doing here so late?" Gabriel hesitated, clearly torn between loyalty to his mother and the instinct to be honest. "My mom works here. She cleans the offices at night. I couldn't stay home alone." "I understand." Alexander studied the boy's honest face, recognizing a maturity that shouldn't exist in someone so young. "And what do you think of the painting?" "It's pretty," Gabriel replied, relaxing slightly. "But the people look tired, like my mom when she comes home from work." The simplicity of the observation hit Alexander like a punch to the gut. When was the last time someone had spoken to him without ulterior motives, without a hidden agenda, without fear or interest? "Financial." "What's your name?" "David Johnson." "My mom is Lisa." The boy hesitated again. "Are you going to tell her that I left the room? She gets really worried when I misbehave." Before Alexander could respond, hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. Lisa appeared at the reception, her face pale with worry, carrying a spray bottle and cleaning cloths as if they were defensive weapons. "David, I told you to—" She stopped abruptly upon seeing her son talking to a man in a suit. Even though she had never seen Alexander in person, she instinctively knew who he was. There were pictures of him in all the business magazines, and his imposing presence was unmistakable. "Mrs. Johnson." Alexander stood up slowly, observing the terror spreading across the woman's face. "Mr. Vance." Lisa swallowed hard, pulling David behind her in a protective gesture. I can explain. My son didn't touch anything, I swear. The neighbor who looks after him at night traveled, and I had nowhere to leave him, but this won't happen again. I promise." The words poured out in a torrent, revealing the desperation of someone who knew that her job, and possibly her chance to restart in New York City, was hanging by a thread. Alexander watched the scene before him, a mother willing to sacrifice to protect her son. A scared boy, still trying to be brave, 2 people fighting against circumstances they did not choose. Something in his chest tightened, a feeling he hadn't experienced in so long that he had almost forgotten it.
"How old is he?"
he asked, surprising Lisa with the calmness in his voice. 7 years old, sir. And where do you live? Lisa hesitated, clearly confused by the direction of the conversation. In a low-income neighborhood in Brooklyn, sir. It's far, I know, but it's what we can afford. Alexander knew the area, one of the poorest neighborhoods on the outskirts of New York City, where public transport was poor and violence was constant. The woman likely faced more than 2 hours of travel to get to work. How long have you been in New York City? 3 months, sir. Lisa's voice trembled slightly. I came from a small town in Pennsylvania. There were no opportunities for both of us there. David, sensing the tension in the air, stepped forward. Sir, if it's my fault for being here, please don't fire my mom. She works really hard and is the most honest person in the whole world. The innocent and fierce declaration of loyalty made Alexander close his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his decision was made. Mrs. Johnson, you will be transferred to the afternoon shift starting next week. From 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. This will solve your son's school schedule problem. Lisa blinked, confused. Sir? And there will be a 30% pay raise to compensate for the shift change. Alexander headed toward the elevator, stopping only to look at David one last time. Take good care of your mother, kid. Honest people are rare in this world. The elevator doors closed, leaving mother and son alone in the reception, still processing what had just happened. Mom, David whispered. That man didn't seem as scary as you said bosses were. Lisa hugged her son, tears of relief streaming down her face. She didn't fully understand what had motivated the unexpected generosity of the most feared businessman in New York City, but she knew their lives had changed that night in a way she had never imagined possible. 2 weeks passed since the unexpected meeting, and Alexander found himself constantly watching the clock during the afternoons, waiting for the arrival of the new cleaning shift. There was something unsettling about how easily that boy and his mother had occupied a space in his thoughts, a space he had carefully kept empty for years. Mr. Vance, Sarah entered his office carrying a stack of contracts. The lawyers from the merger with Petrocorp are here. They insist you need to review the clauses before tomorrow's meeting. Alexander nodded absently, his eyes turned toward the window. Down below, the typical late-afternoon traffic of New York City stretched like a metallic serpent through the avenues. Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes. There's one more thing. Sarah hesitated at the door. Mr. Marcus Steinberg called again. This time he left a message saying that the deadline is approaching and that certain information has reached the ears of investigative journalists. Alexander's jaw tightened. Marcus was ramping up the pressure, and he knew the German wasn't making empty threats. During his 30 years in the financial market, he had seen solid businessmen destroyed by well-orchestrated smear campaigns. Schedule a meeting with our communications team for tomorrow morning, Alexander instructed, and ask Rodrigo to do a complete security check, phones, emails, everything. If Marcus is getting internal information, we have a leak. Sarah quickly jotted it down and left, leaving Alexander alone with his dark thoughts. He headed to the private bar and poured himself a shot of bourbon, but before he could bring it to his lips, a child's laugh echoed down the outer hallway. David. Alexander put the glass down and walked to the door of his office, discreetly opening it. In the main hallway, he saw Lisa vacuuming with efficient and precise movements. A few feet away, David was sitting on the floor, surrounded by school books, doing his homework under the soft glow of the hallway lights. Mom, the boy's voice carried frustration. I can't understand this math problem. It's too hard. Lisa turned off the vacuum and approached her son, drying her hands on her apron. What is it, my love? David pointed to his notebook. It's about division. The teacher wants me to divide 144 by 12, but I don't know how to do it without a calculator. Lisa knelt beside her son, studying the problem with a concentrated expression. Alexander noticed that she hesitated, clearly struggling with the math. Let's see, she murmured, 144 divided by 12. Try doing some small subtractions. What is 12 times 10? 120, David replied quickly. That's it. So 144 minus 120 is 24. And 24 divided by 12 is 2. David smiled, proud. So the answer is 12. Ma, exactly. Lisa kissed her son's forehead. You are very smart, my love. Alexander watched the scene with a mix of admiration and melancholy. The dedication of that mother to help her son, even while clearly struggling with concepts she herself did not fully grasp, touched something deep in his memory. His own mother had done the same decades ago, when he was just a dreamer from a lower-middle-class family in Santos. Unconsciously, Alexander left the office and approached the two. Good afternoon, he said softly, making both Lisa and David look up surprised. Mr. Vance? Lisa quickly stood up, clearly embarrassed. I'm sorry, David was just doing his homework. We won't interrupt your work, I promise. You're not interrupting, Alexander replied, crouching down to examine David's notebook. Math, huh? What grade are you in? Second grade, David replied shyly, but with his eyes shining with curiosity. We're learning division, but it's really hard. Alexander studied the exercises in the notebook. They were basic problems, but he noticed that David had attempted to solve some much more complex ones in the margins of the page. 3-digit multiplications that were technically correct. Did you do these calculations by yourself? He asked, pointing to the multiplications in the margin. David blushed. Yes, sir. I like numbers. Sometimes I make up problems to solve when I get tired of the easy ones. Alexander felt something stir in his chest, a sense of recognition. He himself had been like that in childhood, always seeking bigger challenges, always wanting to understand how things worked. How about I teach you a trick for division? He offered, surprising both David and Lisa. Really? The boy's eyes lit up. Alexander grabbed a pen and sat down on the floor next to David, completely ignoring the fact that his $5,000 suit was now in direct contact with the marble floor. Let's take a big number. How about 1,728 divided by 24? David's eyes widened. That's really hard. Not if you know the secret, Alexander smiled, a genuine smile that Lisa hadn't seen in years. First, let's break 24 into smaller numbers. 24 is 8 times 3, right? David nodded, focused. So instead of dividing by 24 directly, let's first divide 1,728 by 8, and then divide the result by 3. For the next 20 minutes, Alexander patiently taught David mental math tricks he had learned during his college years. The boy absorbed everything like a sponge, asking smart questions and discovering patterns that even adults would have trouble noticing. Lisa watched the scene in silence, torn between gratitude and confusion. The most powerful man in New York City was sitting on the floor, teaching math to her son, with a patience she never would have expected. There was something almost paternal in the way Alexander explained the concepts, making the complex simple, without ever making David feel dumb. Now try this, Alexander wrote 2,436.36 in the notebook. David bit his lip, concentrating. After a few minutes of mental calculations, he smiled triumphantly. 6766. No, wait, 67.7. It's not giving a round number. It doesn't have to give a round number, Alexander laughed. In real life, most problems don't have perfect solutions. The important thing is to get as close as possible to the right answer. Like in business, David asked innocently. The question caught Alexander off guard. Exactly like in business. At that moment, he realized he hadn't thought about mergers, acquisitions, or threats from Marcus Steinberg for almost half an hour. His mind was completely focused on teaching a child, on seeing his eyes light up with each new concept mastered. Mr. Vance, Lisa finally interjected, her voice laden with contained emotion, I don't know how to thank you. David has always struggled with math in school, and you've accomplished in 20 minutes what I've been trying to do for weeks. Alexander stood up, discreetly brushing off the dust from his suit. He's smart. He just needed someone to explain it in a different way. Sir, David ran up to him, timidly holding onto the hem of his jacket, can you teach me more tricks tomorrow? The simple, hopeful question hit Alexander like a bolt of lightning. How many years had it been since someone sought him out simply for his company, without ulterior motives? "If your mother allows," he replied, looking at Lisa. "Of course," she whispered, still processing the inexplicable generosity of that man. "But we don't want to interrupt." "You're not interrupting," Alexander interrupted, and for the first time in years he was being completely honest. He returned to the office with a strange feeling in his chest, something akin to joy, but mixed with a melancholy he couldn't explain. He sat at the table and tried to get back to work, but his eyes kept drifting to the door, where he could still hear the soft sounds of Lisa working and David doing his homework. For the first time in decades, Alexander Vance had remembered what it felt like to be useful for something beyond money and power. And this discovery frightened him more than any threat Marcus Steinberg could make. The month of July brought with it an intense cold that transformed New York City into an even grayer and more merciless place. In the office of Vance Holdings, Alexander was flipping through a corporate intelligence report that his head of security, Michael Reed, had placed on his desk that morning. The document detailed Marcus Steinberg's activities over the past few months, and the findings were more concerning than he had imagined. "Michael," Alexander called on the intercom, "come here. We need to talk." Michael Reed was a former investigator from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, whom Alexander had hired 5 years ago after an industrial espionage attempt had almost cost the company $1 billion contract. Tall, dark-haired, with discreet scars that hinted at a difficult past, Michael had become one of the few employees whom Alexander completely trusted. "The news isn't good," Michael said bluntly, sitting down at the mahogany table. "Marcus isn't working alone. We've identified at least 3 investigative journalists who received anonymous tips about alleged irregularities in the company. And there's more. He hired a private investigator to follow you." Alexander clenched his fist. What kind of irregularities?" "Mostly fabricated. Alleged offshore accounts, questionable operations, inappropriate relationships with employees." Michael paused significantly. "Alexander, they know about Lisa and the boy." Alexander's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "We have photos of you talking to them in the hallways." "Alone it doesn't mean anything, but in the right hands." Michael shook his head. "Marcus could create a narrative that you're having an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate. In the age of Me Too, that would destroy your reputation." "That's ridiculous." Alexander stood up abruptly. "I just helped a child with homework." "I know, you know. But the press doesn't need facts, just a sellable story." Michael leaned forward. "Alexander, I need to ask, is there anything between you and Lisa?" "Of course not." The answer came out louder than Alexander intended. "She's an employee, a mother, struggling to give her son a better life. I just identified with her situation." Michael studied his boss's face. In 5 years of working for him, he had never seen Alexander show genuine interest in operational-level employees. Something different was happening, but he couldn't pinpoint exactly what. "There's one more thing," Michael hesitated. "We did a deeper background check on Lisa as a security protocol. And she has a college degree, business administration, from a reputable university, with a specialization in financial management. Excellent grades, too." Alexander blinked, confused. "So why is she working as a cleaner?" "For the same reason millions of qualified Americans work below their capabilities. Lack of opportunities, prejudice, immediate need." Michael handed over an additional folder. "She worked for years as an administrative assistant in a small town in Pennsylvania, but lost her job when the local mining company shut down. She came to New York City desperate." Alexander opened the folder and examined the documents. School history, letters of recommendation, certificates. Lisa Johnson was not just a woman struggling to survive. She was a qualified professional forced by circumstances to accept jobs far below her qualifications. "Why didn't she mention this when she was hired?" he murmured, more to himself. "Would you ask her?" Michael raised an eyebrow. "A billionaire businessman wanting to know why a cleaner has a college degree?" She probably thought she'd be fired for overqualification. The irony of the situation hit Alexander like a slap. For weeks, he had been impressed by Lisa's intelligence and determination. Without realizing, he was in the presence of someone who could easily hold management positions in his own company. Michael, I want you to investigate everyone involved in this campaign against me. I want names, connections, funding sources, and I want it all by tonight. I'm already working on it. But Alexander... Michael stood up, hesitating at the door. Maybe you should keep your distance from Lisa and the boy for now, until we resolve this situation. Alexander didn't respond, but the suggestion bothered him deeply. The idea of avoiding David, of losing those conversations that had become the best part of his afternoons, left him irritated in a way he couldn't explain. 3 floors down, Lisa was waxing the reception floor, her movements automatic and efficient from years of practice. David was sitting in a nearby armchair, doing math exercises that Alexander had created specifically for him, progressively more complex problems that challenged his reasoning without frustrating him. "Mom," David called, not looking up from his notebook, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course, my love. Why do you clean offices if you know so much about numbers and businesses?" Lisa stopped scrubbing the floor, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "Yesterday you explained to Mr. Vance how compound interest works when he was teaching me division. And last week, when I asked about what that company on TV does, you knew everything about mergers and acquisitions." David finally looked up. "You're smarter than most adults I know." Lisa sat on the edge of the armchair, pulling her son closer. It was a question she had feared for months, knowing that David was growing up and starting to question the contradictions in their lives. "Sometimes, my love, life doesn't give us the opportunities we deserve," she said softly. "I studied hard, graduated from college, worked in offices. But when we lost our job in that small town, we had to accept whatever came our way. But that's not fair. No, it's not. But life is rarely fair. The important thing is to never stop trying to improve." Lisa kissed her son's head. "And that's why you need to study hard. To have the opportunities I didn't have." David was silent for a moment, processing the information. "Does Mr. Vance know that you're smart?" "I don't know." "And it doesn't matter, David. He's our boss, not our friend. Never forget that. But he's kind to us. Yes, and I'm grateful for that. But rich and powerful people live in a different world than ours. One day he might simply stop caring about us, and we need to be prepared for that." David nodded, but Lisa noticed he wasn't completely convinced. The child had developed a genuine admiration for Alexander, and that worried her. She didn't want her son to suffer when he inevitably discovered that the rich had different priorities than the poor. At that moment, Alexander appeared in the hallway, as he had every afternoon for the past 3 weeks. But this time his expression was tense, worried. "Good afternoon," he greeted, but there was a formality in his voice that hadn't existed in previous encounters. "Good afternoon, Mr. Vance," Lisa replied, immediately noticing the change in mood. David ran up to him with enthusiasm. "Mr. Vance, I solved all the problems you left yesterday, even the hardest ones." Alexander smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Very well, David. You are indeed very smart. Did you bring new problems today?" David asked hopefully. Alexander hesitated, Rodrigo's words echoing in his mind. "Keep your distance." "Not today, David. I'm very busy with work." The disappointment on the boy's face was immediate and devastating. "Oh, okay." Lisa watched the interaction with growing apprehension. There was something happening that she didn't understand, but she recognized the signs. The same respectful distance that the powerful always showed when reminded of their place in the social hierarchy. "David," she said gently, "go put away your books. We need to finish the work." The boy reluctantly obeyed, and Lisa turned to Alexander. For a moment their eyes met, and she saw something that surprised her, not disdain or indifference, but something akin to internal conflict. "Mr. Vance," she said softly, "if we did something wrong—" "You didn't do anything wrong," Alexander interrupted quickly. "It's just complicated." And with that enigmatic response, he turned and headed back to the elevator, leaving Lisa with more questions than answers. That night, while returning home on the crowded bus that crossed New York City, Lisa held the sleeping David in her lap and wondered how long that unexpected kindness would last. She had learned not to trust in miracles. They always came with a price. Monday arrived heavy with tension on the 38th floor of Vance Holdings. Alexander faced one of the most challenging weeks of his business career. In the Oval Conference Room, 6 international investors awaited explanations about the rumors that had been circulating in the financial market in recent days. "Alexander," began Heinrich Müller, a representative from a German fund, "we are concerned about certain information that has reached our ears. Questions about your emotional stability, possible inappropriate relationships with employees." Alexander's jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. "Heinrich, you have known me for 15 years. When have I ever failed to honor a commitment? When have I ever failed to deliver results?" "It's not about financial performance," interjected Margaret Foster, a British executive known for her calculating coldness. "It's about corporate image. In times when any scandal can destroy a company overnight, we need to ensure our investments are secure." "What scandal?" Alexander leaned forward, his brown eyes gleaming with a dangerous intensity. "Show me a fact, a concrete piece of evidence of any inappropriate behavior." Margaret opened a folder and spread photographs across the table. Alexander felt his stomach churn as he recognized the images. Him talking to David in the hallway, crouched on the floor teaching math, Lisa in the background organizing her cleaning supplies. A 58-year-old man, single, spending time alone with a young employee and her child, Margaret coldly enumerated. In any court of public opinion, this raises questions. "This is obscene!" Alexander slammed his fist on the table, making the water glasses tremble. "You are sexualizing a completely innocent interaction between an adult and a child." "We are not doing anything," Heinrich replied calmly. "But the media will. And when they do, the stock value will plummet 20, maybe 30%. Alexander abruptly stood up, walking to the panoramic window. Down below, New York City buzzed with its usual chaotic energy, millions of people fighting for their lives without worrying about the power games happening in the skyscrapers. "What do you want?" he asked without turning around. "Simple," Margaret replied. "End any contact with that employee and her child. Transfer her to another department, another shift, preferably another building, and seriously consider Marcus Steinberg's acquisition offer." "Marcus is behind this." Alexander turned slowly. "You know that, don't you?" "What we know," Heinrich stood up, "is that Marcus offers stability, predictability. He does not get emotionally involved with subordinate employees." "You are blackmailing me." "We are protecting our investments," Margaret corrected. "You have 48 hours to resolve this situation, Alexander. Otherwise, we will withdraw our capital and recommend that others do the same." After the investors left, Alexander remained alone in the conference room, studying the photographs spread across the table. In one of them, David was beaming as he showed a solved exercise. In another, Lisa watched the scene with an expression of gratitude and maternal affection. They were images of purity and humanity being turned into weapons of destruction. The phone rang. It was Michael. "Alexander, we have a bigger problem." Journalist John Smith from the New York Times called. "He wants an interview about your suspicious nighttime activities at the office." "Damn," Alexander pressed his temples. John Smith was known for his devastating reports on businessmen. If he was interested in the story, it meant Marcus had escalated the game. "There's more. Lisa is being investigated too. Someone hired a detective to dig into her past in Pennsylvania. Why? Looking for anything they can use against her. Doubts, past relationships, anything that can paint a picture of opportunism." Alexander closed his eyes. The war had officially begun, and Lisa and David were being used as ammunition in a battle they didn't even know existed. 3 floors down, Lisa felt the weight of curious glances and malicious whispers. During the past week, she had noticed that other cleaning staff treated her differently. some with barely concealed envy, others with open suspicion. "Lisa," called Mrs. Carter, a 60-year-old woman who had worked in cleaning for over a decade. "Can I talk to you?" Lisa followed the older colleague to a discreet corner of the hallway. Mrs. Carter looked around before speaking, her expression serious. "My dear, you need to be careful. They are saying things about you and the boss." "What kind of things?" Lisa felt her blood run cold. "Nonsense, of course, but you know how people are. They say you are taking advantage of the situation, that you are using the boy to—" Mrs. Carter sighed. "I know it's not true, but what?" "Rich people don't mix with people like us for no reason, Lisa, and when they do, it's always us who end up losing." The words echoed in Lisa's mind for the rest of the day. She had started to let her guard down, to believe that perhaps there was genuine kindness in the corporate world. But Mrs. Carter's observations confirmed her initial instincts. She was navigating dangerous waters. In the afternoon, when David came home from school, she noticed he was quieter than usual. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked, helping him with his backpack. "Mum, why are people at school asking if you're dating a rich man?" Lisa felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. "Who asked that?" "The teacher overheard two moms talking at the gate. They said they saw a report online about you." David looked up at her with his big, worried eyes. "Is it true?" "Of course not, David. I work for Mr. Vance, nothing more." "Then why are people saying that?" Lisa knelt down to be at eye level with her son, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes, sweetheart, when poor people like us receive kindness from rich people, other people get jealous and make up nasty stories." "Does that mean Mr. Vance will stop being our friend?" The question broke Lisa's heart. "David, I've already explained, he's not our friend. He's our boss, and it might be better if we keep our distance from him. But I like learning math from him." "I know, sweetheart. But sometimes we have to give up things we like to protect ourselves." That afternoon, when Alexander came down for his usual walk through the halls, he found only Lisa working. David was sitting in a distant chair, quietly doing homework without his usual enthusiasm. "Good afternoon," Alexander greeted, but immediately sensed the coldness in Lisa's response. "Good afternoon, Mr. Vance." David looked up hopefully, but Lisa gently pulled him back to his books. "Keep studying, David." Alexander understood the message. Lisa was creating distance, probably for the same reasons he should be doing. It was the smart decision, the safe decision. But seeing the disappointment on David's face made Alexander feel something break inside him. That child was innocent of the dirty games of the corporate world. He didn't deserve to be punished for Marcus Steinberg's greed or society's prejudices. "David," he called softly, ignoring Lisa's warning look. "Yes, sir?" "Did you finish the exercises I left you last week?" The boy's eyes lit up. "I did. I even made up some new ones."
"How about showing me?"
Lisa stepped forward. "Mr. Vance, perhaps it's not appropriate." Alexander looked directly into her eyes. "Mrs. Johnson, may I speak with you privately?" They walked to a more secluded area, away from David's curious ears. "I know what's happening," Alexander said quietly. "I know about the rumors, the pressures, the photographs." Lisa paled. "Sir, malicious people are trying to use our friendship against me, and consequently against you as well. Then perhaps we should really keep our distance," Lisa replied, her voice trembling. "Or perhaps we should fight against it." Lisa looked at him in surprise. "Fight? Sir, with all due respect, you're a billionaire. I'm a cleaner. We don't have the same power to fight against anything." "You're right," Alexander agreed. "But I have enough power for both of us, and I won't let them turn a genuine friendship into something sordid. Mr. Vance, Alexander. My name is Alexander." For the first time since they met, Lisa saw him not as a distant boss, but as a man fighting against the same forces that oppressed her, just from a different angle. "Alexander," she tested the name, "I don't want David to get hurt when all this is over." "Neither do I," he replied sincerely. "But I also don't want him to learn that he has to hide when doing the right thing." At that moment, they both understood that the battle was not just about reputation or money. It was about the right to be human in a world that insisted on reducing them to their social roles. The storm arrived on Thursday morning when the New York Times published a devastating article titled, "The Tycoon and the Cleaner, Corporate Romance or Opportunism?" John Smith's report spanned 4 pages, filled with photographs, speculation, and anonymous sources painting a sordid picture of the relationship between Alexander and Lisa. Alexander read the article in his office, each word fueling his anger. The text suggested that he was exploiting his position of power to seduce a vulnerable employee, using her son as a bridge to an inappropriate relationship. There were quotes from concerned colleagues and corporate harassment experts analyzing every photograph as evidence of predatory behavior. "Michael!" he shouted into the intercom, his voice echoing through the silent office. Michael appeared within seconds, carrying a stack of morning newspapers. It's also in the state of Pennsylvania and the Philadelphia Inquirer. Social media is on fire. Advanced scandal is trending. Who are the anonymous sources? Alexander demanded, slamming his fist on the desk. One of them is definitely someone from the cleaning company. Probably Mrs. Carter. She was approached by reporters yesterday and seemed too nervous for someone who didn't say anything. Michael paused. "But there's something worse, Alexander. NBC wants an interview. The nightly news wants your version of the story." Alexander abruptly stood up, walking to the window. Down below, there was already a small crowd of reporters at the building's entrance, cameras and microphones ready to capture any movement. "And Lisa, how is she?" "Not well. Very poorly. She didn't come to work today. According to the supervisor, she's locked at home with her son, refusing to answer the phone or open the door." Guilt hit Alexander like an avalanche. He had promised to protect them, but his arrogance and underestimation of Marcus's cruelty had made everything worse. An innocent woman and her child were paying the price for a corporate war they didn't even understand. "Mr. Vance," Sarah hesitantly entered the office. "There's a situation at the reception. Lisa's mother has arrived from Pennsylvania. She's very upset, shouting that you destroyed her daughter's life." Alexander closed his eyes. Lisa's family had been dragged into the scandal. He imagined a simple woman from the countryside, seeing her daughter publicly exposed as a gold digger, without understanding the complexities of the dirty corporate game. "Send her up. I want to talk to her." "Sir, she's very nervous. Maybe it's not—" "Send her up, Sarah." 15 minutes later, Mrs. Johnson stormed into the office like a hurricane. She was a small woman, about 60 years old, with grey hair tied in a bun and eyes burning with indignation. She wore a simple cotton dress and carried a worn leather bag. Clearly, she had traveled all night to reach New York City. "Are you the infamous Vance?" she asked bluntly, planting herself in front of the mahogany desk like David facing Goliath. "I am. Mrs. Johnson, I can explain." "Explain?" Mrs. Johnson slammed her bag on the desk. "Explain how you destroyed my daughter's reputation, how you turned my granddaughter into a national joke." Alexander swallowed his pride and stood up, walking around the desk to get closer to her. "Mrs. Johnson, please sit down. Let me tell you what really happened. I don't want to sit in your rich man's chair," she exploded. "I want you to explain why my daughter, a girl I raised with great hardship, who studied, who never harmed a fly, is being called a gold digger all over Brazil." The pain in the woman's voice was palpable. Alexander saw in her all the parents who had fought to give dignity to their children, only to see their efforts tarnished by circumstances beyond their control. "Your daughter did nothing wrong," Alexander said firmly. "She is one of the most honorable people I have ever met. What is happening is a smear campaign orchestrated by a competitor who wants to destroy me. And why does she have to pay for it?" Mrs. Johnson asked, tears beginning to stream down her face. "Why does my grandson have to see his mother being humiliated?" "She doesn't, and I will fix this." "How?" she shouted. "How are you going to fix the fact that the kids at Gabriel's school are laughing at him? How are you going to fix that the neighbors in that small town in Pennsylvania are whispering about my family?" How are you going to fix that my daughter can no longer find a job because everyone will think she is a gold digger? Each question was a stab to Alexander's chest. He had completely underestimated the extent of the destruction Marcus could cause. In his arrogance, he had only thought in terms of business and corporate reputation, forgetting that on the other side were real people with real lives who would be devastated by the war. "Mrs. Johnson," Alexander said softly, "I take full responsibility for what happened, and I will do whatever it takes to repair the damage. Whatever it takes." Mrs. Johnson challenged him. "Then stay away from my daughter and my grandson, forever." The words hit Alexander with unexpected force. For weeks, Gabriel had become the brightest part of his days. The prospect of never seeing him again, of losing him forever, was more painful than any financial loss. "I understand your point of view," he finally said. "But before you make that decision, I would like you to know who your daughter really is." Mrs. Johnson frowned. "What do you mean?" Alexander walked over to a file and pulled out the folder that Michael had prepared about Lisa. "Your daughter has a degree in business administration from the University of Pennsylvania with honors. She has enough knowledge to hold managerial positions in any company in the country. But she was forced to accept cleaning work because our society does not provide opportunities for people like her." He opened the folder, showing the documents. "During the weeks I got to know her, I saw not only her integrity, but her exceptional intelligence. Your daughter is not just a victim of this situation. She's a victim of a system that wastes talent due to prejudice and circumstances." Mrs. Johnson examined the documents, her expression gradually shifting from anger to confusion. "She never told me because she didn't want you to feel responsible for her struggles. Lisa is one of the noblest people I have ever met, Mrs. Johnson, and I have fallen in love with this family. Not romantically," he quickly added, "but as extraordinary human beings who reminded me of what is important in life." Silence stretched between them. Mrs. Johnson wiped her tears and sat heavily in one of the chairs, the weight of the revelation overwhelming her. "If you really care about them," she finally said, "why didn't you protect them?" "Because I was arrogant. I thought my power and influence would be enough to keep any threat at bay. I never imagined someone would be capable of attacking an innocent woman and a child to get to me. And now, what will you do?" Alexander turned to the window, watching the reporters down below. A decision was forming in his mind, a decision that could cost him his company, but that would save Lisa and Gabriel. "I will do the right thing," he said, turning to Mrs. Johnson, "even if it costs me everything." At that very moment, in the small apartment in a low-income neighborhood in Brooklyn, Lisa was hugging Gabriel on the worn-out couch in the living room, both watching the cruel comments on social media about their family. The boy didn't fully understand what was happening, but he knew his mother was suffering. "Mom," Gabriel said softly, "is Mr. Vance really a bad person?" Lisa looked at her son, remembering the kindness, the genuine emotion he had seen in Alexander's eyes, the patience with which he had taught math to David, the generosity in changing his work schedule without being asked. "No, my love," she replied sincerely. "I think he is a good person being attacked by worse people. And we are caught in the crossfire. Then why don't we help him?" David's innocent question touched something deep within Lisa. Throughout her life, she had been taught to keep her head down, accept injustices, and not cause trouble. But perhaps it was time to fight. Perhaps it was time to show the world who they really were. On Friday morning, Alexander made the riskiest decision of his business career. He called a press conference for 2 p.m., completely ignoring the advice of his legal and communications team, who insisted on defensive strategies and cautious statements. "Alexander, this is professional suicide," warned Dr. Richard Thompson, his lawyer for 15 years, an elegant man with graying hair who had navigated the scandals of dozens of businessmen. "Never in 3 decades of my career have I seen anyone come out victorious from a press conference during a crisis like this." "Then it will be the first time," Alexander replied. adjusting the navy blue tie he had carefully chosen, a color that conveyed confidence and seriousness. "Dr. Thompson, for 15 years, you have advised me to avoid unnecessary risks. Today I am taking the biggest risk of my life because I have finally found something worth more than money." In the main auditorium of Vance Holdings, about 80 journalists settled into upholstered chairs, their cameras and recorders ready to capture what many predicted would be the end of one of the most powerful businessmen in the country. Major television networks would broadcast live, and social media buzzed with speculation about what Alexander would say. Mark Stevens watched from Germany via streaming, accompanied by Henry Miller and Margaret Taylor. They all believed they would finally have confirmation that Alexander had lost emotional control, the final nail in the coffin of his reputation. At exactly 2 p.m., Alexander entered the auditorium, walking with the upright posture that had characterized his presence since his Harvard days. There were no advisors or lawyers by his side, just him, a microphone, and the truth he intended to tell. "Good afternoon," he began, his deep voice echoing through the silent auditorium. "Thank you for coming. I know you all expect defensive statements or categorical denials regarding the accusations that circulated this week. You will have none of those." A murmur swept through the auditorium. John Smith, sitting in the front row, leaned forward, sniffing what could be the confession of the century. "Instead," Alexander continued, "I will tell a story. The story of how two extraordinary human beings taught me what I had forgotten in 30 years of corporate life." For the next 20 minutes, Alexander narrated every detail of his relationship with Lisa and David. He spoke about their first meeting, the math lessons, discovering Lisa's college education, and David's exceptional talent. His voice choked as he described how a 7-year-old child had asked why he always had lunch alone. "Do you want to know if there is anything inappropriate between me and Lisa Johnson?" Alexander looked directly into the cameras. "Yes, there is. There is the fact that a woman with a college degree and exceptional knowledge is cleaning floors because our society does not offer equal opportunities for all. There is the fact that a brilliant child is growing up in the outskirts of New York City without access to the quality education his talent deserves." The auditorium was completely silent. Some journalists had stopped writing, absorbed by the emotional intensity of the testimony. "Do you want to know what is truly obscene about this story?" Alexander leaned over the podium. "It is that we live in a country where helping a child with homework is considered suspicious, where recognizing the value of an employee is interpreted as sexual interest, where basic human kindness is turned into scandal." John Smith raised his hand. "Mr. Vance, don't you think your position of power creates a natural imbalance in any relationship with subordinate employees?" "Of course it does," Alexander replied without hesitation. "And that is exactly why I have been careful never to misuse that position. Want to see abuse of power? Look at the businessmen who keep employees in precarious conditions, who pay miserable wages, who completely ignore the well-being of those who work for them. I offered better opportunities, education, and respect. If that is a crime, then I plead guilty." A journalist from NBC stood up. "But Mr. Vance, wouldn't it be more appropriate to maintain professional distance with all employees?" Alexander looked directly at her. "It would be safer, no doubt. But do you know what the result of that professional distance is? It is the cold and inhumane world we have built, where CEOs earn in a day what their employees earn in a year, where talented people are wasted due to prejudice, where brilliant children are ignored because they were born in the outskirts." He paused, letting the words resonate. "For 58 years, I lived in this glass tower that I built myself. Lisa Johnson and her son David showed me that true wealth is not in net worth, it is in genuine human connections." "And what about the accusations that Mrs. Johnson is taking advantage of the situation?" asked another reporter. Alexander's expression hardened. "Lisa Johnson has never asked me for anything. No favors, no advantages, no special opportunities. On the contrary, she has always maintained a respectful distance, always concerned about not causing trouble. If anyone took advantage of the situation, it was me. I took the opportunity to be around genuine people in a world full of falsehood. The climax came when Alexander revealed the true motivation behind the attacks. This smear campaign is not about me or Lisa Johnson. It is about a corporate predator named Mark Stevens, who has been trying to force the sale of my company through blackmail and intimidation. When his traditional tactics failed, he decided to target innocent people. Alexander presented evidence that Michael had compiled recorded conversations, suspicious financial transfers, connections between Mark and the journalists who initiated the campaign. It was a devastating accusation that completely changed the narrative. Mark Stevens calculated that I would sacrifice my principles to protect my business, Alexander concluded. He was wrong. I would rather lose everything than betray the people who showed me what dignity is. After the interview, the auditorium erupted into frantic activity. Journalists rushed to send in their stories. Phones rang incessantly, and social media dramatically shifted its tone. The hashtags Rise Soul Less Body and Justice for Lisa began to spread. In her apartment in a low-income neighborhood in Brooklyn, Lisa watched the live interview, embraced by her son and mother. The 3 generations of the Johnson family cried together, not out of humiliation, but from pure emotion at seeing someone publicly defend them with such fervor. "Mom," David whispered, "Mr. Alexander is really our friend, isn't he?" "Yes, my love," Lisa replied, her voice choked with emotion. "I think he is." Mrs. Johnson wiped her tears and stood up determined. "Lisa, you need to get back to work. This man just risked everything for you. The least we can do is show that we are not cowards." That night, when Lisa returned to Vance Holdings, she found a crowd in front of the building, but this time it wasn't just reporters. It was employees, former employees, ordinary people who identified with her story. Many carried supportive signs. "Lisa represents all of us, and dignity is not a crime." Alexander was waiting for her at the reception, his eyes showing a mix of relief and apprehension. "How is David?" was the first thing he asked. "Proud," Lisa replied, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "Proud to have a friend like you." For the first time in weeks, Alexander smiled genuinely. The battle was far from over, but something fundamental had changed. They were no longer fighting alone. The weekend following the press conference dramatically transformed the national narrative. Social media buzzed with massive support for Alexander and Lisa, while Mark Stevens found himself at the center of a devastating investigative report exposing his predatory practices not only in the United States but throughout Latin America. On Monday morning, Alexander arrived at the office to find Sarah beaming, surrounded by stacks of national and international newspapers. "Mr. Vance," she said, barely able to contain her excitement, "you need to see this." The Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, even the BBC covered the story. "And look at the headlines." Alexander examined the headlines. "American CEO challenges corporate culture with human decency," from the Financial Times. "The power of authentic leadership in Latin America," from the Wall Street Journal. "And how a Brazilian entrepreneur redefined success," from Epoca magazine. "But the best," Sarah continued, "are the emails. Over 500 messages of support from business leaders, academics, politicians. The Secretary of Education wants a meeting to discuss corporate education policies." Michael entered carrying a folder full of documents, his face displaying the first relaxed expression in weeks. Alexander Mark is in total panic. 3 of his largest investors pulled their capital yesterday. The Securities and Exchange Commission opened a formal investigation into his activities in the U.S. "And our investors?" Alexander asked, although he already knew the answer from Michael's smile. "Henry Miller called this morning. He offered formal apologies and assured that the German fund has total confidence in your leadership. Margaret Taylor sent an email praising your innovative business courage." Michael laughed. "Typical. When they thought you were weak, they abandoned you. Now that they've seen strength, they want to be on your side. Alexander walked to the panoramic window, observing the bustling city below. New York City continued its chaotic dance, but something had changed in his perspective. The people on the streets were no longer abstractions in a financial game. They were Lisa's and David's, each with their struggles, dreams, and wasted potential. Sarah, cancel all morning meetings. I want you to schedule a talk with our human resources team and call the directors of all subsidiaries for a video conference at 3 p.m. Any specific agenda, sir? We are going to talk about how this company treats people. 3 floors down, Lisa worked with renewed energy. The public humiliation had given way to a pride she hadn't felt in years. Colleagues who had previously avoided her now greeted her warmly, and some even shared their own stories of struggle and overcoming. Lisa, Mrs. Carter approached, her expression heavy with remorse. I need to apologize. I spoke to that reporter because I was scared that if something went wrong, we would all lose our jobs. I understand, Mrs. Carter, Lisa replied sincerely. We all have fears when it comes to survival, but you were brave, braver than any of us. The older woman wiped away a tear. My daughter called me yesterday, said she saw the boss's interview. She said she has never felt so proud to have a cleaning lady for a mother. During lunch, David came home from school visibly excited. His teachers had spent the morning discussing the importance of education and how talents can be found anywhere. Several classmates who had previously ignored him now wanted to be his friends, impressed by the fact that his billionaire friend had mentioned him on national television. Mom, David said, organizing his books in the hallway, the teacher wants me to participate in the school's math Olympiad. She said I have a knack for numbers. Lisa smiled, remembering how Alexander had recognized that talent weeks before. Of course you will participate, my love, and there's more. David was practically vibrating with excitement. The school principal wants to talk to you. She said there are special programs for children with math aptitude. At that moment, Alexander appeared in the hallway, carrying an official envelope. Good afternoon, he greeted warmly. David, how was school today? Amazing. All good. The world wants to be my friend now. David ran up to him. And the teacher said you were right about me being good at math. I always knew. Alexander knelt down to be at the boy's level. Speaking of which, I have a proposal for both of you. Lisa approached, curious and slightly apprehensive. Mrs. Johnson, Lisa, Alexander corrected himself. During our battle this week, I realized something important. This company wastes talent every day, not just yours, but that of hundreds of employees who are underutilized due to prejudice or lack of opportunity. He opened the envelope and took out some documents. I would like to create a new department in the company, internal talent development. It would be responsible for identifying employees with underutilized potential and creating training and promotion programs. Lisa examined the papers, seeing her own photograph on an employment contract. I don't understand. I'm offering you the position of director of this department. Starting salary of $15,000 a month, plus full benefits for you and David. The silence that followed was deafening. Lisa looked at the documents, then at Alexander, then at David, trying to process the magnitude of the offer. But she stammered, I don't have experience in business management. I've only worked in small offices in Pennsylvania. You have something more valuable than experience, Alexander replied firmly. You have lived experience. You know what it's like to struggle. You can recognize potential because you have been underestimated yourself. And you have the necessary academic background. David tugged at his mother's shirt. Mom, accept, please. David, it's not that simple, Lisa murmured, still in shock. Actually, it is, Alexander said gently. The question is, do you trust me enough to accept? Lisa looked into his eyes, the same eyes that had shown genuine kindness since their first meeting, that had defended her family on national television, that had risked everything for principles. I trust you, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. So it's official? David asked, practically bouncing with excitement. "It's official," Alexander confirmed, extending his hand to Lisa. "Welcome to the executive team at Vance Holdings, Director Johnson." As Lisa shook his hand, both felt they were sealing more than just an employment contract. They were creating something new, a way of doing business that did not forget the humanity behind the numbers. That afternoon, during the video conference with the subsidiary directors, Alexander announced a quiet revolution. Each unit of the company would implement similar internal development programs, salary reviews based on actual competencies, and promotion policies that considered potential beyond academic pedigree. "Gentlemen," he said to the screens filled with surprised executives, "we have spent decades building a financially solid company. Now we will build a humanely solid company." Dr. Richard Thompson, who was watching the meeting as an observer, shook his head in admiration. In 30 years, defending entrepreneurs, he had never seen anyone turn a crisis into a catalyst for social change. When the meeting ended, Alexander remained alone in his office, but for the first time in years, solitude did not bother him. He knew that downstairs, Lisa was studying the management manuals he had requested, preparing for the challenge of her life, and that David was doing his homework, dreaming of math Olympiads and universities that had once seemed unattainable. A week earlier, Mark Stevens had tried to destroy him by attacking his humanity. Ironically, he had forced Alexander to discover that his humanity was his greatest strength. The war was over, but the true revolution was just beginning. 3 months had passed since Lisa took on the role of Director of Internal Talent Development, and the results exceeded all expectations. Her first project had been revolutionary, a comprehensive mapping of all employees in the company, from security guards to managers, identifying academic backgrounds, hidden skills, and professional aspirations ignored by the traditional corporate structure. "Alexander, you need to see these numbers." Lisa entered his office, carrying a presentation she had prepared with the same care a surgeon takes in preparing for a complex operation. In recent months, her transformation had been remarkable. From cleaning uniforms to sharp suits, from initial insecurity to genuine confidence based on concrete results. "We discovered that we have a night security guard with a degree in civil engineering, 2 cleaning assistants with MBAs, a driver who is a certified accountant, and a receptionist who speaks 5 languages fluently," she reported, her eyes shining with the enthusiasm of someone who had found hidden treasures. In 3 months, we promoted 17 employees to positions more suited to their qualifications, and overall productivity increased by 23%. Alexander studied the graphs and spreadsheets, impressed not only with the results, but with the analytical sophistication of Lisa's work. "These numbers are impressive. How is the reaction from the other directors?" "Initially, there was resistance," Lisa admitted, adjusting her glasses, which she now wore, a change that symbolized her new professional identity. "Some thought we were disrupting the natural hierarchy, but when they saw the productivity and employee satisfaction numbers, the resistance decreased dramatically." "And David? How is he dealing with all these changes?" Lisa's face lit up. "He is thriving. The private school we secured with the company's health plan recognized his math talent. He's participating in state Olympiads and has caught the attention of teachers from Harvard." At that moment, the door opened and David ran in, still wearing the uniform from his new school, a prestigious institution in a neighborhood in New York City that had once seemed an impossible dream for a family from the outskirts. "Alexander." David had abandoned formalities months ago, treating the businessman like the affectionate uncle he had become. "I won the first round of the Olympiad, and there's more. My teacher said that if I keep this up, I can compete for a full scholarship at MIT. "MIT?" Alexander stood up, genuinely excited. "The Massachusetts Institute of Technology. David, that's extraordinary. It's what I've always wanted." David was practically dancing with joy. "I want to be an aerospace engineer and working at NASA." Or better yet, creating a Brazilian NASA. Lisa observed the interaction between her son and Alexander with a mix of gratitude and astonishment. Months ago, David was just another child from a low-income neighborhood with dreams limited by circumstances. Now he spoke about NASA and MIT as real possibilities, not impossible fantasies. "Mom," David turned to her, "the teacher wants to talk to both of you next week. She said I have the potential to participate in a special program for young scientific talents." "Of course, my love," Lisa replied, still getting used to the idea that meetings with teachers were no longer about problems, but about opportunities. Alexander watched the family scene with a sense of completeness he hadn't experienced in decades. For years he had measured success only in financial terms: profits, market share, return on investment. Now he understood that true success was seeing a bright boy discover that the world was within his reach. "Lisa," he said softly, "there's something I want to discuss with you. A proposal that might sound crazy. After everything that's happened, I think I'm ready for anything," she laughed. "I want to expand our program to other companies. Create a foundation that offers free consulting to identify and develop hidden talents in corporations across the country." Lisa blinked, processing the magnitude of the proposal. "Are you talking about turning a local initiative into a national movement?" "Exactly. Imagine how many Lisas are out there working in roles far below their capabilities. How many Davids are being wasted because they were born in the wrong place or the wrong family?" David, who had been listening to the conversation, approached with his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "Like a corporate Robin Hood, stealing talent from the rich to give opportunities to the poor." Alexander laughed at the childish analogy, but realized that David had perfectly captured the essence of the idea. "Something like that, champ." In the following weeks, the Vance Johnson Foundation took shape rapidly. Lisa led the operational side, developing methodologies for talent identification and corporate training programs. Alexander provided the initial capital and his corporate connections, while David inadvertently became the young face of the initiative, appearing in campaigns that showed how investment in education could transform lives. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Companies from all over the United States sought consulting, universities offered academic partnerships, and the federal government signaled interest in incorporating some of the methodologies into public education policies. "Alexander," Michael entered the office carrying a stack of contracts. "We have expansion proposals for Argentina, Chile, and Colombia. And look at this. Harvard Business School wants to do a case study on our humanized management model." "Harvard?" Alexander raised an eyebrow, recalling the years he had spent there as a student, focused solely on maximizing profits and aggressive competitive strategies. "Interesting how things come full circle. There's more. Mark Stevens has been indicted for market manipulation and corporate extortion. He will face charges in 3 countries. The news brought a satisfaction that Alexander did not expect. It was not revenge, it was justice. Mark had tried to destroy innocent people for greed, and now he would face the consequences. "And the German investors?" he asked. "Henry Miller called yesterday. He said the fund wants to increase its stake in the company. Apparently our humanized model is generating financial returns superior to traditional methods." Alexander smiled ironically. For months, he had feared that prioritizing people over profits would destroy his company. In reality, he had created a more sustainable and profitable business model than anything he had imagined before. That afternoon, during his usual walk through the company's hallways, Alexander observed the changes that had transformed the work environment. Employees greeted each other with genuine warmth, not just formal professionalism. There was creative energy in the air, a sense of purpose that transcended salaries and benefits. At the reception, he found Mrs. Carter, now promoted to Employee Quality of Life Supervisor, a position created specifically to leverage her experience in understanding workers' needs. "Mr. Alexander," she greeted him warmly, "how is our prodigy doing?" "David is doing well. brighter every day. And Lisa? Who would have thought our cleaner would become one of the most respected executives in New York City? Alexander reflected on the question. Lisa has always been extraordinary, Mrs. Carter. She just needed the right opportunity to show it. You have changed many lives here, you know. Mine, Lisa's, David's, all of us. Actually, Alexander said thoughtfully, I think they changed my life more than I changed theirs. It was true. Months ago, he was a powerful but empty man, isolated in his glass tower, measuring value only in financial terms. Now he understood that real power came from the ability to uplift others. The true wealth lay in genuine human connections. When he arrived at his office, he found a letter on the desk, official letterhead from the presidency. The government wanted to appoint him to a national commission on business innovation and social responsibility. Alexander looked out the panoramic window, watching New York City stretch infinitely in all directions. Down below, millions of people were struggling for their lives, many of them carrying hidden talents, repressed dreams, wasted potential. He had discovered that transforming lives was not only morally right, it was also good business. And he was just getting started. 6 months later, on a sunny December morning, Alexander was on stage at the convention center in New York City, in front of an audience of over 3,000 business people, educators, and social leaders gathered for the first National Human Talent Congress. The event, organized by the Vance Johnson Foundation, had become the largest gathering on humanized management in Latin America. A year ago, Alexander began, his voice echoing through the packed auditorium, I was considered one of the most successful businessmen in the country. I had billions in the bank, hundreds of employees, considerable political influence. But I was completely lost as a human being. In the front row, Lisa watched proudly, alongside David, who wore the new blazer they had bought for the occasion. The boy held a certificate he had received in the morning. First place in the National Mathematics Olympiad for elementary school students. Next to them, Mrs. Johnson had traveled all the way from a small town in Pennsylvania to witness this historic moment. The transformation we experienced at Vance Holdings was not just a corporate experiment, Alexander continued. It was a silent revolution that proved something fundamental. When we genuinely invest in people, everyone wins. Employees, the company, society. Over the past 6 months, the results had exceeded even the most optimistic expectations. The company recorded a 40% increase in productivity, an 80% reduction in employee turnover, and a 60% increase in job satisfaction. More importantly, it had promoted 123 employees to positions more suited to their actual qualifications. But true success, Alexander pointed to David in the audience, is measured by the lives transformed. David Johnson, who was once just a kid from a low-income neighborhood doing homework in the hallways, just received a full scholarship to study at the best science school in the country. And his mother, Lisa, who once worked as a cleaner, has become one of the most sought-after talent management consultants in the United States. The audience erupted in warm applause. David blushed and waved shyly, still not completely accustomed to public attention. Lisa held his hand, remembering the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. Dr. Richard Thompson, sitting among the VIP guests, nodded in admiration. He had represented dozens of entrepreneurs throughout his career, but he had never seen anyone turn a personal crisis into a social movement of such magnitude. The model we developed, Alexander continued, has already been implemented in 87 companies across 12 states. The results are consistent. Identifying hidden talents leads to greater productivity, lower turnover, and healthier work environments. In the audience, Henry Miller and Margaret Taylor, the investors who a year earlier had threatened to withdraw their capital, were now personally overseeing the international expansion of the model. They had discovered that humanized management was not only ethically superior, but also financially more profitable than traditional methods. But our work is just beginning, Alexander announced. Revealing plans for 2026, we are launching the Vance Johnson Institute of Corporate Education, which will offer free professional training courses for employees of partner companies. And in partnership with the Department of Education, we will create a national program for early talent identification in public schools. David whispered something in his mother's ear, and she smiled and nodded. The boy stood up and walked to the stage, surprising Alexander and the audience. "Can I speak?" David asked into the microphone, his voice still childlike but filled with impressive maturity. "Of course, champ." David turned to the audience of 3,000 people and spoke with a clarity that left everyone impressed. "A year ago, I was just another poor boy who thought I would never be able to study at a good university. Today I know I will be an aerospace engineer and that one day I will help the United States reach the stars." The emotion in his voice was palpable. "But what I want to say to you is that it's not just about me. In every neighborhood, in every small town, in every family struggling to survive, there are children like me. Children who are smart, who have dreams, who just need an opportunity." Alexander felt tears welling up in his eyes. The boy he had known doing homework in the hallway had become an eloquent spokesperson for millions of children in the United States. "Mr. Vance didn't just change my life," David continued. "He showed that adults can believe in children, that employers can care about employees, that wealthy people can help poor people without wanting anything in return." The audience was in complete silence, absorbed by the pure sincerity of the speech. "So I want to ask one thing from you," David concluded. "When you return to your companies, to your homes, remember that you might know the next person who could discover the cure for cancer, or invent a time machine, or solve world hunger. But that person might be cleaning the bathroom in your office, or selling candy at the traffic light, or failing in school because no one believes in them." The silence that followed was broken by a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. People were openly crying, others were standing in applause, and many were already picking up their phones to call their companies and start making immediate changes. After the event, Alexander, Lisa, and David walked together through the gardens of the convention center. The December sun shone brightly, and New York City stretched out in all its chaotic complexity. "David," Alexander said, "you know you officially became a national leader today, right?" "I just spoke the truth," David replied, kicking a pebble along the path. "And that's exactly why you are a natural leader." Lisa watched the two most important men in her life, one 8 years old, the other 59, and reflected on the extraordinary journey they had shared. From a cleaner with forgotten diplomas, she had become one of the most respected voices in corporate management in the country. But more importantly, she had raised a son who understood the power of using privilege to uplift others. "Alexander," she said softly, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Are you happy now?" "Really happy?" Alexander stopped walking and looked around, at David running after a butterfly, at Lisa, who had become not just a colleague, but one of the most important people in his life. At the city, he no longer saw merely as a business board, but as the home of millions of human stories. "Lisa," he finally replied, "for 58 years I thought happiness was about accumulating power and money. It took me all this time to understand that happiness is using what you have to make a difference in the lives of others." "And what comes next?" Alexander smiled, watching David, who had stopped, to show the butterfly to a child passing by with their parents. "Now we continue. There are millions of Davids waiting for opportunities, millions of Lisas working below their potential. We have a lot of work ahead." That night, at the closing dinner of the conference, Alexander was surprised by an international phone call. It was the president of Yale, inviting him to give a lecture on the new paradigm of business leadership at the same university where decades ago he had only learned about profit maximization. "I accept," he said without hesitation. "But with one condition, I want to bring Lisa and David with me. It's important that they see that these concepts are not academic theory. but lived reality. After hanging up, Alexander went to the balcony of his apartment, watching New York City stretch infinitely under the nightlights. Somewhere in this gigantic metropolis, other Lisas were working in jobs that did not do justice to their talents. Other Davids were doing homework in quiet hallways, dreaming of futures that seemed impossible. But now there was hope. There was a proven model that change was possible, that companies could be profitable and humane simultaneously, that investing in people was the best investment of all. Alexander Vance had started as a cold, calculating businessman, isolated in his glass tower. He had become a man who understood that true wealth was not measured in net worth, but in the number of lives one could transform for the better. And as he watched the city that never sleeps, he knew this was just the first page of a much larger story, a story about how a chance encounter between a lonely billionaire and a struggling family had planted the seeds of a silent revolution that would continue to grow for generations. The glass empire had transformed into something far more valuable, a legacy of hope. Please like, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and if you watched until now, comment "I watched until now" and leave your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the final screen. It's very exciting.